Hello, Pod Smashers of the Internet, and welcome to another episode of
80-bit Pod Smash,
Where Gaming Goes to Grab a Beer.
We're your hosts, Penguin and Termite. I am Penguin.
And I am Termite, and we are a weekly video game podcast smashing together ideas that you care about with video games.
Vidya games. Tonight we are celebrating 4th of July, Independence Day, where we successfully won our freedom from the English. And we're talking about explosions, because fireworks are one of the most identifiable parts of the holiday, and explosions are also very prevalent and common in video games. So we wanted to talk all about what goes into the design of explosions. We'll get into all of that and more. But first, we are where gaming goes to grab a beer. So, are you drinking the same thing you were drinking like an hour ago?
I did not change drinks. Yes, so I'm still drinking the absolutely amazing, incredible single malt whiskey, the Matsui. It's Japanese whiskey from the Kurayoshi distillery in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
I bought this in Hawaii, and they don't distribute this anywhere on the East Coast, and it surpassed all of my expectations for what I thought Japanese whiskey could taste like. It's amazing. Yeah. So it's ridiculously smooth. It has that. It's made from malt whiskey, right? So It's not. Sake is made out of rice, so it's a very different taste. It's more wine than this. This smells like that whole wine thing, but it has a full-blown like whiskey taste, feel, and flavor, and it is really, really smooth and really good. Nice. This is next level. So there you go.
Sweet. I am drinking just what I drank last week. So if you listened last week, I was drinking Monkey's Uncle Lemongrass Triple, and this is not because I have another additional one. It is because it is literally the same one. What? Just, giving you guys a little bit peek behind the screen here. We are, we're having to record double up on our recordings because Termite has a 3-week work trip coming up. And so, we're just trying to stay on top of it, stay ahead of things, that we can continue the content pace. But it does mean that, we're both pretty much drinking the same thing we were drinking last week. So that's good for me because it gets to stretch out my beer purchases, which I can't complain about. But I do have some new stuff to talk about for our next week's recording.
Oh,
because I bought some for hanging out on Father's Day with a friend of ours, and Ryan. I've hung out with Ryan. It's no one. Nice. It's no surprise or anything.
Right.
But I bought some beer for that, and then I have some left over for the podcast.
Your words.
That's good.
He's the only friend left around that hangs out with you regularly in
pretty
like
much.
proximity. Yeah.
So
the
only one left. So that is that. Yeah. This lemongrass triple. Next week will be next week, and I'll have another beer. That will probably be the same beer for like 2 episodes, but fine.
So, we'll do what we got to do.
All right. Well, I'm assuming that since we talked about the PlayStation Plus thing last week, and yet there's been still an enormous amount of news because we're basically in the middle, at where we are now, we are at the end of what basically was the E3 replacement. Yep. Everyone's been calling it not E3.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So there's been lots of announcements that we didn't really even cover. We didn't do any of our normal stuff this year. I don't know. I don't remember if we consciously chose not to or if we just passed us by because we weren't like.
Well, it was so different and fragmented, and there was no central E3. And there's a critique of the fact that there's like some people say E3 is dead, doesn't mean anything anymore. It's a whole thing. But when you're covering news like stuff the way that we would like to cover it or consume it and want to be educated and follow everything that's going on, it's good to have that one umbrella event that's like, here's where everyone's going to talk, and there's a designated spot for each company to say their thing. And yes, I understand the argument that like Nintendo does their Nintendo Directs when they want to do it in their own blue ocean, and they're not competing with the attention of anyone else, and that's great. But sorry, rant over. That's probably why both of our lives are crazy busy, and we just didn't have the bandwidth. Like last year, we had a news show because lives looked a little different with the pandemic, and we weren't as crazy. So you're right. We totally crazy. We had our weekly news show where we covered this stuff, and in years before that, we would have our E3 hype prediction, and like the show would happen, and then we would go into the results, and that was actually one of our favorite, best downloaded episodes was our E3 hype one. So I don't understand what happened, but we just didn't, because it's all fragmented. It's like, what's Summer Games Fest? What's not? Who's speaking? What are the things? What's going on? And then when they get scheduled and thrown out, it's like, what time zone can we cover this? And it's always 5 p.m. We're both in the middle of dinner and kids, and it's impossible for us to get in front of a computer or a screen. I know I like barely watched any of the stuff this time live.
Yeah,
because
I
of the
couldn't.
time.
I didn't at all. I didn't watch anything. I watched everything after the fact because every time they had an event, I was like with my kids.
Yep. Every
Either I
time.
was like
And that's the thing about
outside or-
E3, because E3, it was the ESA was smart and said, hey, the coverage is TV based, so let's go with primetime TV. And then they targeted the primetime TV hours, which are the evening after the kids go to bed. So these shows were either they were way more accessible, I feel like. Maybe I'm completely off base. Someone has a spreadsheet of exactly what time every single like keynote speech happened, I'm sure, and it can prove me wrong. Do it. That would be awesome. But I feel like E3 was always prime time, which is the evening after kids, and we had more time to cover them.
Mm-hmm.
This time it was just like in the afternoon, 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock. And we're like, no, we have children and dinner time and kitchens to clean and food to cook in that order, because that's dumb. Yeah. So
exactly.
Anyway,
So
what about if we want to like pick out something maybe from this whole slew of things, something you're excited about, or like
Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth,
there you go. There it is.
Final Fantasy VII
right?
Rebirth, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And the most important thing, I'm less excited about Rebirth being part 2 itself, and more excited about two things. The fact that, in order of most excited to least excited, I am most excited about they officially announced it was going to be a trilogy. We have been talking about this.
How long is it going to go?
Yeah. And they told us, they said last thing we heard, they were like, oh, we could go several parts. We really want to like dig into this. And so then that left all of us thinking like, well, crap. Like, are they going to do this for like 7 entries? And is it going to go on for like 30 years? Right? Like, that's insane. So I'm glad that someone knocked some sense into them and got them to accept that they needed to do it in 3 years, because just like Cory Barlog said regarding God of War, is like, I would love to finish this thing before my kids are in college. That would be great. That would be great. So anyways, that was number 1. Number 2, Crisis Core. I never got to play Crisis Core, and it looks awesome. It looks just like it looks like it's going to have some different, like slightly different systems, but the gameplay looks more or less like
the systems they pulled directly out of the PSP port, because I'm like a third of the way through the game on PSP, and so when I saw
but like
there's like a roulette going on with card numbers, you'll see that like that's ripped right out of the PSP, and then the health bar and the MP bar and the way the combat looks and feels.
Yeah, my only complaint is I'm just disappointed that what I loved about 7 Remake was the party, right? Being able to switch between everybody in the party. And so not having a party
right
now, but it's okay. It's still going to be fun to be able to, it'll be fun to get a taste. I won't have to wait a year to get back into that. Sorry, I won't have to wait 2 years to get back, or a year and a half rather, to get back in that universe. I'll be able to do it at the end of this year, supposedly. It's coming out in December or November. It's coming out this year, supposedly. The Crisis Core reunion, which by the way, people are trying to predict now. So it's Final Fantasy VII Remake, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and so everyone was like, well, it's going to be Final Fantasy VII Reunion, but then they threw that out of the window because they have Crisis Core reunion, and they're not going to double up on that.
Right.
So
no,
what's the last word? Resurrection,
possibly. Aerith comes back from the dead.
It could do reconciliation. I mean, I still think they're gonna. I think my prediction is they're still gonna hit the major story beats, right? Like the little bit of gameplay they did show off was like you walking around with Sephiroth, which is presumably a flashback to the Nibelheim section of the game. And so, I think they're still gonna hit the major story beats, but they might still change little things here and there.
Yeah.
And I'm still of the mind that I think they're gonna save Aerith, but kill someone else off in her place.
Ooh. Yeah, we'll see.
So whatever. Talk too much about Final Fantasy. I talk forever, but
of course,
7 Remake. That's kind of
my single favorite video game of all time. So yeah, I'm with you. We could do an entire podcast about Final Fantasy VII. Let's do it.
Rebirth.
Explosions. Well, we'll do it. Here we go. Welcome to the Final Fantasy VII podcast. We just blew up 80-bit. It's gone. No.
It's gone. Explosion. We explosioned it. Yeah. What else? I'm racking my brain actually.
So Capcom had a showcase, and they showcased a whole bunch of stuff. Microsoft had their showcase. Had a big
Sony
one.
had theirs. Yeah.
Sony had theirs, and I can't remember anything about what Sony was doing, but so Final Fantasy VII was
Final
mine.
Fantasy 16, right? They showed off.
Yeah, I guess that was their big reveal was 16. So obviously mine is also all of the Final Fantasy news. I'm very excited about those two things you just mentioned, but I love when they remaster things. So Resident Evil 2 remake and Resident Evil 3 remake and Resident Evil 7 are now natively on PS5, and I'm so stoked because I haven't played 3 yet. So now I get to play 3 in its best way possible. And then also trophies auto pop from 7 and 2. So my plan for July, when I'm gone for 3 weeks away from my PlayStation, in order to keep my trophy count up, I get to like transfer those over and pop the trophies. And I'll have my trophy rate will look the same month to month, through July, and that'll be a little buff. So that made me really excited. But I really, really loved and appreciated the Xbox showcase. I thought it was awesome. It was the best show by far, which is saying something. We're like, this is the pandemic round 2, right? We're in a dry spell. Everything's been delayed. Everyone's tried to scramble early. Like everything we're seeing now was ridiculously affected by the pandemic. When the pandemic hit, everything that was affected by it was like the end of the cycle. It was like the things that were wrapping up were like disrupted, but this was like the core of development planning and execution were completely explosions by the pandemic and like obliterated. And so now we have this year that's kind of awkward and there's like stuff being shown off that's been delayed and forever and stuff. Anyway, so it's not the most exciting year of announcements ever, but given that, I think Xbox really, really brought it. They showed off Redfall from Arcane Studios, which is looking phenomenal. Cool. High on Life, which is the guys who did Rick and Morty, and I forget the name of the developer, so I apologize.
Oh, yeah.
That looks hilarious, like the first-person shooter with the talking guns. That Forza, again, I love racing games and racing simulators. I've adored Gran Turismo. That's my favorite. But Forza, it's going to be on Game Pass. So Forza 8, let's go. Like I'm going to continue my love for racing sims right from Gran Turismo 7 to Forza. Had a great showing. All kind of cool new tech. I'm scrolling through the list. I always get excited about Fallout 76, but
they showed off
Starfield,
gray No Man's Sky. They showed off ugly No Man's Sky.
Ugly No Man's Sky being Starfield.
Yes, of course. No, No Man's Sky, No Man's Fallout is what they showed.
Yes.
No, I'm kidding. But also, there have been comparison videos online.
Oh, yeah.
And I have to
I'm
say,
sure.
I look more favorably on No Man's Sky than I do.
Yeah,
but
lots more color and like.
I have no loyalty in any way to Bethesda in this regard. So,
yep,
I'll play it if it's going to be fun to play. But I think the comment that I really agreed with after seeing the gameplay was people that were saying that like they missed their window. Like if this game's been in development, well, so they said it's been in development for like 5 years, but it's been like active development, but it's been like Todd Howard had his plan for Starfield apparently like 2 decades ago, and it's like, well, bro, you missed your window because sorry, it looks like a generic space game. Like at this point, that genre has been done to death, and nothing they showed was granted, it looks like a big fun space game, but at the end of the day, none of its ideas looked like unique when you have that space filled up by No Man's Sky, by Outer Worlds, by there's just so many space games that really feel like Starfield already. So it's not exciting in the same way like Elder Scrolls was when Elder Scrolls like first came out. It's not exciting in the way that Fallout was when Fallout came out, because there weren't a ton of post-apocalyptic games, and fantasy games, though they were a dime a dozen, there was nothing like Elder Scrolls when it came out. So I just think they missed if they wanted to really break open the sci-fi space exploration, like sorry, No Man's Sky beat you to the punch, unfortunately, because that seems to be what people have been most unfavorably comparing it to. Other than that, though, I mean, yeah, they showed off all their Blizzard stuff too, so that's a thing. There's a
Diablo
Necromancer
4,
in Diablo
right?
4.
Yeah.
Who's surprised?
Yeah.
Which means all those Paladin fans are crying in their weenies because there's no Holy Crusader like kind of character, and people are predicting it would be Paladin.
Well, everyone should be crying in their Wheaties because Blizzard is Blizzard, and Diablo 4 is going not to be anything as good as what they've done in the past, because it'll have microtransactions shoved down our throats. Yeah. Maybe Microsoft can steer that part. But yeah, I'm excited about Starfield for this very reason. It's the first Bethesda game that's new that I've anticipated, because I discovered Skyrim and Fallout 4 late after they had come out. Fallout 76 was that can of worms. And so like this is the next proper iteration of Skyrim or Fallout, like proper, that I am now geared up for, because I had those previous experiences. So let's go. Let's do it. I'm excited about it. It's going to be good. I'm not like there are people losing their mind over Starfield. I'm not that. Like I'm excited to play it. I'll play it to be on Game Pass. There's no Like, no barrier of entry for me at all. I'll
Right.
just go download it. I'll preload it day one, and I'll play it for a couple hours and see what I like. And if I hate it, no, that's it. I'll move on. And that's great.
Move on.
Yeah.
Well, it's made seeing that gameplay though made me want to actually play No Man's Sky, which is funny. I popped it on my list on PlayStation, so we'll see. Cool. All right.
Yep.
Then I guess that's we can talk about how not E3 and all of the announcements that came with it may be a kind of favorite thing, hit or miss, but
doing this podcast is our favorite thing.
Doing this podcast is our
favorite things.
Favorite Things is a segment of our show where we share with you something that we were excited about, something that provoked our thoughts or got us exhilarated, or was something deep and meaningful and spiritual and fulfilling, or something super chill and like mildly amusing. Could be any of those things, and all of it we are taking time to share with you so that you are inspired to go out and find your next favorite thing. So hit me with your best shot. Fire away.
Fire away. Explosions. Father's Day happened. So Father's Day, there was lots of cagey discussions with my wife about plans for that day. And come to find out, her and the moms in our neighborhood had all gotten together and made plans to do something for all of the dads together. And so anticipations abound, and I was like, oh, well, what's going on? Because I was trying to go to like a distillery with some of the folks, or like go to a brewery, or like, do something fun. Because hilariously enough, every Mother's Day and Father's Day celebrations involve not doing your role as a mom or a dad. It's like, how can you get away?
Well, I heard an interesting, our friend Ryan actually brought an interesting point up about that I thought was like aspirational. And he said, if you feel like you have to get away from your children on Father's or Mother's Day, then like you're not making enough time away from your children. Like you need that built into your daily life.
Right. Yep.
I'm not telling anyone how they should or should not, but
yeah,
he's right that like if you're like, the last thing I want to do is be around my kids, then you're probably need to get away from the kids more throughout the month, the regular months. And that way, and then that way you at least maybe would feel the option. I've always found the opposite to be true. I've always found that, not the opposite, rather. I've always found that there's a weird double standard where it's expected that dads hang out with their kids on Father's Day, but mothers, it's expected they will get away from their kids on Mother's Day.
Huh.
Yeah, and I bet you it's mostly due to traditional gender roles being the mother is always with the kids and the father is often not. So
you got to be careful, Penguin. You're shedding a flashlight. You're putting a flashlight on the patriarchy a little bit here. Just a systemic issue of women in general and how they're treated.
You know what we can do with the patriarchy?
Ooh, we have a family-friendly podcast. Explosions! I love it. The caveat to my Father's Day discussion is my desire, like what I got to do, because this thing was not me. Like it was a surprise that was being planned for me. I didn't get to choose or say anything that was going on. So knowing that was going to happen, I begged and pleaded for a time frame. It was in the evening, starting at like 3. So I was like, great, I have the whole morning. My favorite thing to do with my family ever, and it's part of this favorite things, is to go out to breakfast. I love getting up, which getting out of the house is a astronomical feat in and of itself, like an Olympic game, to get 2 children ready and wife and myself dressed, to face the public and go out is already a Herculean task. So I get that, but I love going out to breakfast. So we First Watch is a restaurant here in Charlottesville. I absolutely love it. It's like a great breakfast place. It's awesome. So we went and we did that. That's part of my favorite thing. I had a wonderful breakfast. Everything was great. The food tasted amazing. The kids generally do well in restaurants, so that wasn't a problem. We bring lots of distractions, coloring tablets and paper and toys and such. But the favorite thing I was highlighting was the surprise. What was it? What happened, right? So I was told by 4:00 to go over. We have this area in our property called the Grove, and it's like a shaded tree area with picnic tables spread around and tables with some lights hung up that stays lit during nighttime, and we call it the Grove. So go over to the Grove and just await what happens to you. I was like, okay. So I walk on over there, and surely enough, the explosions, it kind of was. There was a seafood boil explosion all over this picnic table. So a full-blown seafood boil was bought and delivered and set up for us with like king crab legs and sausage and potatoes and corn and crackers and butter and Old Bay and all of it. And so we just devour, and shrimp, of course, got to have shrimp, cocktail sauce, and beers, a whole cooler full of beers. And so we were left to our own devices with that, and we destroyed all of the food, and it was wonderful and amazing. And we had a great time. It turned into poker inside of our common house afterward in the dining area. And we stayed out till like 10:30, like crazy partiers that we are. 10:30. Oh boy, crazy. Time to go home.
Yep.
Yeah. So it was great. That's my favorite thing.
Crazy kids.
All of that. Father's Day was wonderful.
Well, ironically, Father's Day was my favorite thing as well, and it was because the weather. It was 90% because of the weather, because of its like 70-degree weather we had with Saturday and Sunday.
Yep.
It was an interesting weekend. My mother-in-law, her boyfriend from Wales came to visit. So for the first time, so we got to meet him because they've been like dating online for like 2 years now. She's gone over there. So it was the first time he came over here. So we got to meet him. He was a pretty cool guy. Not going to lie. I was very, very good first impressions. So shout out to Geraint and his family over there in Wales. They are pretty cool dudes. He bought.
Did you just explode his name? Oh, okay.
I did explode his name. Well, no, his name. This is well, kind of what his name's pronounced. I think I might have embellished it a teeny bit, but yeah. So no, he bought me beer, so of course I'm gonna be okay with that.
You're in love.
Anyways, no, nothing like
beer.
That. I still have my.
Buy you beer.
Well, I'm in beer love, sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Yep. Whether the dude ends up marrying my mother-in-law or not, if he continues to buy me beer, he'll have a special place in my heart for that reason.
There you go. You can't beat that.
So that was Saturday. We got to meet him, and because they were there, like they took my kid to the lake, and I, with my other kid, I got to just hang out on Saturday and like play Ghostwire Tokyo for like a couple hours. That was awesome. And then Father's Day proper, I got to go down to the lake because the weather was so nice, and we just like. I mean, we were only there for like an hour, but like it was still so nice. I was like there for the lake for an hour. We came back home. Kids napped at the same time because we chose to go to the lake. So then me and my wife got to like watch Obi-Wan Kenobi and just
nice.
Like I went to then when my kids woke up, I took Gavin to my son Gavin to Food Lion and grabbed some. I was like, you know what I want to make on Father's Day? I want to make chili dogs. I was like, I want to get some hot dogs, and I normally don't love hot dogs. They're not my like grilling of choice. I would rather do brats or burgers, but in this case, I was just like, I want chili dogs though. So I got like a can of Hormel chili. I got some onions, and I grilled out some hot dogs, and it was fantastic. I actually had one tonight. When I burped just now, I tasted chili. It reminded me of Father's Day.
Yummy.
So it was a great day. All things considered, like, you know, like I was kind of, you know, hinting at with my last week when I talked about the beach, I was like, you know, sometimes when you're with your kids, it's chaos and they are misbehaving and everything is frustrating. But sometimes it's just nice to be with them and do fun stuff when like the circumstances are good. I mean, like you said, when you say your kids are great in restaurants, like my kids are great when when we're doing something, right? Like it's when they're cooped up in the house that they get crazy. But like we go to the lake, they're awesome. We go to the park, they're awesome. We go to the beach when we were at the beach, they're awesome. Like all things considered. And when they're being awesome and we can do fun things, that's when we get to form like fun memories, because it's like, oh yeah, you're listening to me and we're playing. And my son's right at that age. He's not in the water yet, so we don't get to have a lot of fun in the water, but we get to have a lot of fun on the sand. Like we get to have a lot of fun just like throwing a tennis ball around or digging with his toys, shovels and stuff in the sand. So yeah, awesome day and weekend. So that's my favorite thing.
Love it.
So.
Yes.
Oh, and as a sort of side favorite thing, our early birthday present from my mother-in-law was some outdoor lighting, like not like string lighting. And so then recently my parents had gotten us a like canopy. So now our back deck, we have the lighting, the canopy, and most importantly, rest in peace, my dog who died back in December. But the greatest side effect of that is there's no more poop. More poop on our deck. So it's actually really enjoyable to go sit out on our deck now.
Yes.
In the shade with the lighting and with the weather, the way the weather had been the last couple days. It's just like, magnificent. So that's
love it.
Favorite things.
Chili dogs.
Chili dogs. All right. Well, that leads us to our last and final segment before we talk about explosions proper. DLC. DLC is a segment of our show where we talk about something you wouldn't normally talk about, video games. It's meant to be a fun, more casual conversation to get the gears turning. So, in the honor of explosions, pick a video game. We're gonna talk about the classic hero puts his sunglasses on while an explosion happens behind him, and they walk away from the explosion. But that's not always done gracefully. So I want both of us to each pick a video game character, ideally that we've never picked before, and talk about how we think that character would handle walking away from an explosion. All right,
but it is where I gravitate towards all the same characters that I always mention. Go ahead. You got one?
Yeah.
All right.
I'm going to go with one that I've been obviously just recently having finally platinumed all 3 Mass Effect games and completed the Legendary Collection. I'm going to go with we haven't talked about Commander Shepard yet.
Awesome.
So
I know nothing about this man or woman. Femshep.
Or woman. Femshep, exactly. Which for me, it's Femshep.
Nice.
My Jane Shepard was and is the only Shepard that matters. The imposter male version is exactly just that. I mean, so the answer, of course, so first of all, I think Shepard probably caused the explosion.
Okay.
I think the way they're reacting is in either case, Shepard is, at least the way I played Shepard, they may have caused the explosion, but they're making sure their teammates are so she's probably got her arm around someone, sheltering them from the blast and just getting everybody, into safety, just unfazed by the explosion itself, but preoccupied with making sure people are safe. That's how Shepard's reacting to walking away from explosion.
You can read all of that on her face, the emotions.
Yeah, the concern, her eyes are darting towards her team, checking in, making sure everybody's there, and just boom, 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 get everybody's safety. That's how she's reacting. So she's an unfazed badass, but she's not it's not yeah, look at me walking away, I'm cool. It's more I'm unfazed because I'm preoccupied with making sure everyone's safe.
And the explosion was planned, so there's no surprise that this thing is blowing up behind her.
In either case, I think that either she sees it coming because someone's about to blast them, or I think that in all cases Shepard's probably, and that partially is because I played her as Paragon, but I played her as Paragon. Apparently everybody, that's the white hat version, right? Mm-hmm. Apparently statistically 95% of BioWare released those statistics for the Legendary Collection, and they were 95% of people went Paragon, because Renegade's not as interesting. I think Renegade, I mean, it can be interesting. Some of the choices can be interesting to do Renegade, but I think all things considered, most people play Paragon because it feels more genuine to the way the character is written. So in that regard, I think that yes, since most people tend to go Paragon with her, I think that's how that character would react, as far as I'm concerned.
All right, I've got one, and it's not on my shelf. Cuphead.
Oh, okay.
Cuphead. An explosion happens behind him, and he is laughing devilishly with his teeth gritting and going hee 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 hee, and probably bent over or squatted as he gets away from it, and then he squats over on the side, and he's just this devilish grin, giggly, punchy, did something that he wasn't supposed to, and what actually exploded was probably a piece of property that belonged to what's the Elder Kettle. I don't know if you've watched the show, but always getting into mischief. I just think that's funny. The art style is the perfect caricature of that explosion happening behind him. That would work. So
I like to think that if he wasn't prepared, if he didn't cause it and was taken off guard, then his reaction would be his head would spin around and his eyeballs would do that thing.
Oh yeah,
very cartoonish. Yeah,
yeah.
So that's a good one. That is a good one. All right. Well, that is DLC then. We want to hear your video game characters walking away from explosion and what's their vibe? What's their explosion vibe? So, Termite, where can the Good Pod Smashers share their DLC ideas if they have them?
Don't give us lame examples like Titus from Final Fantasy X,
Boo.
But do give us some good examples.
Yay.
Over at 80bitpodsmash.com, 80bitpodsmash.com. It's our landing website where you'll find links to all of our social media outlets, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, and Twitter, as well as our Discord server, You can give us all of your live feedback. We'll talk about it. We'll actually chat and respond, have a great conversation and discussion. I hope if you do it, it's probably going to be great because that's how it is. It's how we are because we're cool people. So come hang out with us on social media. And if you're listening to this show by way of, say, like Twitch or YouTube or some other strange non-audio way, you can find our audio podcast. Episodes go live every Monday at midnight, and you can find all of those through our RSS link, as well as links to Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Google Play, Apple Podcasts. We're there, all at 80bitpodsmash.com.
Yay, yes. We are cool people, so you're probably cool people if you listen to the show.
That's right.
All right. So, explosions.
Explosions!
Time, well, hold on. Do it quiet, but like with all the intensity of an explosion. Explosions.
Oh.
That's what we're talking about tonight.
Yeah.
Explosions. Not the stupid version, implosions, but explosions.
Ooh, implosions are kind of fun too, though.
The implosions. Wow. I think I actually... yeah, they'll come up.
Sweet.
So, yeah, fireworks are, of course, a form of explosion. And fireworks, more importantly, as far as America, this holiday, the Independence Day is concerned, they are meant to represent actual explosions, right? Like, so they are sort of a harmless, fun, like, representation of what, you know, the war we fought for our independence, right? So it's like there's meaning behind it more so than just like, you know, I think a lot of people probably look at it and like, oh, those dumb Americans blow stuff up on 4th of July. Like, yes, but we blow stuff up because we are fond of blowing stuff up. Because by blowing stuff up, we, you know, ended the tyranny of the British Empire. So it's meaningful explosions to us. So we want to honor that and talk about video game explosions. So the first question there is, what do explosions have to do with video games? What about video games has anything to do with explosions? It's kind of an easy lowball.
So what do explosions have to do with video games?
Yeah, even well before the sort of like 2000s, when we think of like video games trying to go for that like gritty military shooter vibe. I mean, you had the sort of pixelated explosions, right? You had the, you know, yeah. And so those were like render design choices, right?
Asteroids had explosions.
Exactly. Yep,
that's,
exactly.
You know, the Atari game, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So games, you know, for a long time have been trying to emulate the explosion, emulate the idea, because many video games have stories and worlds in which it makes sense to have explosions. So they're a part of not every video game, but they're part of a lot of video games trying to figure it out. And even ones that you might not think would have explosions, right? Like fantasy games still have magic explosions, or like throwing, you know, like jars of explosive potions and stuff, right? Like explosions are all over the place. And I'm trying to think of other genres, but I'm like,
oh yeah, they're everywhere. I mean, like F1 pole position, when you crash, you blow up. Like hard F1, like whatever. So like, you're right. Through the history of gaming in the arcade space, especially, explosions had that like punch. It was a little bit of a bass of a subwoofer because those cabinets had great speakers. Some of them did. And so, you know, at home in your home console, you're kind of bound by your TV speakers or lack thereof or whatever you have. But like you go to the arcade and some of those games sounded so much better. And the explosions had that little bit of a bass behind it. And it added that like punchy feeling, which added to the immersion of our gameplay. And so like if you're playing your game and you're seeing and feeling the explosions, like that's video games are all about the player interacting and doing something. That's a video game, that, you know, and explosions add that level of immersion to the game. So they're enhancing that player experience. It's not just
especially when you want to punch, right? And good explosions are, when they're done well, they're done. They're not like, it's not the entire game is always explosions. It's like you have a rocket launcher and it's got, compared to your gun, your pistol, which is a kind of explosion too. But like compared to your pistol, which you're shooting all the time, that visceral feel of the pistol is like pop, 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 versus the like boom of the rocket launcher. It's meant to be more rare. It's meant to be something where it's like you're not doing it constantly. Because again, explosions are meant to sort of punch through and give you a bit of exhilaration every once in a while, as opposed to like constant, never ending.
Yeah, and to not spoil the show too much, but the progression of technology has enhanced the ability to render explosions in a much more physically realistic way, and then the cinematic storytelling set pieces that we have now, and like explosions are the centerpiece of all of those things. So it's evolved a lot since the arcades, and now it's everywhere, all around us.
Explosions are all around us.
Yep.
Let explosions into your heart. Cool. All right. Well,
Okay.
then, speaking of designing explosions, then what goes into designing and rendering an explosion in a video game? I actually separated those two as different things. So, what like are the considerations when designing explosions, as in like how they're included in the game? And what goes into rendering explosions, because that is the actual visual representation of the explosion, the thing that we call explosions in real life.
Hmm.
So there's like I think those are the two kind of major areas that we can zoom in on. So starting
Yeah.
with design, what are the considerations when it's like we want explosions in our game? Okay, what do they look like? Or more
Right.
importantly, usually it's more of like, hey, we're designing a game. How are we going to do the explosions? Because it's probably already that in mind.
Something
It's
exploding, right?
built into, right?
But
We're
that's the
making a space
fundamental.
game. Okay, well, you're gonna have to blow up
No
some
way.
ships. How are those explosions gonna work?
Yep. And the fundamental question is why? Why do we have explosions? And so answering that why will be the fleshing out of all of these
Right.
things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why do we have explosions? Okay, how frequently? How often? What effect will they have on the game? Are they going to have? Is it going to be just a death animation, or is it going to be?
Yeah.
Therefore it's kind of meaningless, other than like a visual sound experience, or is it actually going to have effects in the game? Is it going to do splash damage? Is it going to have, and what does that splash damage look like?
Yeah.
How strong is it going to be? What's the radius? How far away? Like, there's so much going into it. And then if you just have like a pre-rendered cutscene, then you have like all the filmography questions that go into what's the framing going to be like? Are we going to shoot it from the top down, left, right,
Yeah.
straight on? What's the lighting going to look like? And why do we have this explosion here? What is the characters involved with going to experience and do? What is the cinematic impact of the plot to have this explosion? What is blowing up? Like, what is
right?
being
And is it
exploded?
like, and there's a difference between an explosion in gameplay and an explosion in a cinematic or for a dramatic moment, right? Like,
Yep.
because like you said, a cinematic explosion, it may narratively kill off a character, but you're the player character is probably not going to be in any danger, right?
Right.
Unless it's like, oh, it's meant to like, oh, it knocks them out, and then but like it's not something where it's like you can't avoid it, right? So it's not a gameplay thing. It's just therefore the explosion can be bigger, it can be louder, it can destroy more things. Heck, it can destroy things altogether, because when you're considering designing explosions, are those explosions going to have lasting impacts on the environment around you, or is it just going to damage the
Yep.
NPCs or the player, right? Like, so
Mm-hmm.
it's like there's all a lot that kind of goes into like when you're like, okay, we're gonna make explosions. Okay, how are we gonna make that work? Because it's almost, and depending on the genre, again, it's almost a foregone conclusion that explosions are gonna happen.
Yep.
So like like then making them work then becomes the thing. And I think that
Yeah.
again, the idea of like radius, area of effect, realism, like all that is like, okay, I will say that grenades in real life do not look like grenades do in TV and video games, right? Like they don't
Right.
explode in a fiery ball. Like that's kind of like a pop and then a little bit of like force going out, and then you
Some
get
smoke.
riddled with shrapnel and some smoke,
Yeah.
right? Exactly, a lot of smoke, and then
Yeah.
you get riddled with shrapnel, and they're still deadly and dangerous, like for a reason, but they're not
Right.
this boo fireball, right? But like again, that's all done for dramatic purposes. But like
Yep.
I will say I could probably list you like 4 games that have grenades in them, and each and every one of them would have a different like radius of effect, right? And
Yep.
damage, right? Sometimes grenades in game, I think of like Borderlands, where like literally you could have, even within that game, you could have a super powerful grenade and then a not powerful grenade. And it's like versus, Call of Duty, where you get by a grenade and it's gonna one shot you,
Yep.
depending on where it lands. So
Yeah. Versus like Halo, where you can stick them on people.
yeah,
The plasma grenades. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yep. Lots and
cool.
lots of things to consider with design. It's woven into the game. At least it should be very, very well. And it's not just a simple like thing that you just do. That's why I like this topic. This is good.
Nice. All right, cool. Well, then in addition to design, you have the rendering itself. You have what does it look like? We kind of touched on this, but when it comes to rendering it, I imagine there's people who design video game graphics. They, I wouldn't say I've ever seen an explosion like listed like explosion expert, but I imagine that these guys who work on the physics and the lighting of the games have to probably worked on explosions and have some expertise in that at some point, right? Because it's like it includes everything: lighting, physics, texture, color, the level design itself, and how the explosion interacts visually with that level design. The weight, the feel, the sound effects, the camera angles, sight lines, and then also things like timing. How does the explosion, right? Because again, in real life, explosions, again, depending on the nature of the explosion, it's like sometimes they happen like super fast, and sometimes they're not visually impressive. So like, do you want to try to emulate that in a game, or do you want it to be more like
Nope.
oh, it like billows up and like slowly sort of just kind of reveals itself? Like, what's the intention there? And that's kind of where what I mean by like the visual level design itself has, and the timing has everything to do with how it's rendered. So
yeah,
all right.
and like there are certain games that just have like cheap, easy explosions everywhere, and I feel like Doom is one of those things. I like Doom Eternal for some reason. Like you have this rocket launcher that just like blows out rocket after rocket after rocket, but the explosions seem almost meaningless. But there's also like this gore like system that breaks away chunks of flesh to the enemies, and then like, but it's all the enemy. It's hard to say, but the guys and girls developing all of the explosions and all of the animations, all the implications, all of the effects on the environment, all of the things that happen. Like Battlefield Bad Company 2 stands out because they had the whole, it was online. So like 32 players in one server, and you could blow up any wall, like any surface with a rocket launcher or grenade. So, or tank or a airplane, helicopter, whatever. And so, but if you were caught in that explosion, there was damage done to you. If you're caught in the rubble from the building collapsing, there was damage done to you. So there's many, many layers to just a simple, it was like monumentally difficult to make that happen. And it was also, I don't think it was ever been done since. And then, of course, Grand Theft Auto 3 and 4 really brought the sandbox explosions, like driving cars into things and how do things in the environment react to the cars exploding, and rocket launchers and such. So we can go on like forever. I feel like I'm just repeating myself now, but it's so nuanced and there's so much involved in it. It's very, very complicated and it's woven everywhere. So yeah.
Explosions. Cool. Well, that I think that covers kind of what goes into it. So then I have a couple of like what's betters. So like some verses here. We're gonna do this is like all personal opinion as to what you think is better, what you enjoy out of explosions in games. So it's kind of how that's kind of like the base of this question, but I structured it as sort of like a versus kind of versus off. So what do you think are done better typically in games on average? Or what do you enjoy more? Do you enjoy a cutscene explosion or explosion that happens in gameplay through like?
I enjoy gameplay explosions usually because they are, even if they're scripted. Nowadays in modern technology, they are usually involving some sort of calculated physics in interaction with the environment. So an explosion affects the world around you in real time. It's just more immersive and more meaningful, I think, to the player that's in that world. And for some reason, the scene in Uncharted 2 with the building collapsing after an explosion and there are still enemies in the room and you have to like slide down and people are still shooting at you, and like you have to time a jump from the build, like you slide out of the building and hit the window and like jump. And I just thought it was an amazing set piece. It was all done in real time and it was likely scripted. So, but what wasn't scripted is like the physics of all the things in the room, like the chairs and the particles and the wood and the chunks and stuff that were all like physics rendered. And when I say like, that's the mathematical calculations of how the environment would react if there was actually an explosion, like the simulation aspect of the computing behind that I love. I am all about it. Like Crysis was one of the first kind of sandboxy physics games where you could shoot leaves and trees and like you could shoot trees down and it would fall and it would like interact with the foliage on the ground, and like you could use a tank and blow things up and blow. Yeah. So I love gameplay explosions. Those are my favorite.
I love gameplay explosions when they're tied to like a character's class or progression, right? So like when you get, whether it's like you acquired a gun that like chains explosions to enemies or whatever, right? Like or you have an ability that like you unlocked where when you do X and Y and Z in an order, then like an explosion happens. Like that's always really viscerally satisfying, and when it's designed well with things like the physics and the weight of that, it can be very, very enjoyable, I think. So I would agree. Like a good, well-timed cutscene explosion, of course, is dramatically fascinating, but it's just, it happens in a cutscene and then it's over, right? So
you watch it. It's no different than watching YouTube.
Yeah. Right, I agree. And like we play video games for the interactivity, so of course, so cool. All right, which do you think as far as types of explosions go? Are you a gun, like an explosion caused by a gun, or an explosion? Like, do you like lobbing something and seeing it explode? Or arguably, again, because guns are explosions. So do you like that rat-a-tat-tat-tat-tat of a machine gun or a sniper rifle, that single feel of a shot? Or again, do you like the idea of like bombs, traps? And I would even say rocket launchers kind of fall in that category of explosions
Ooh.
there. Yeah.
I don't like bombs and traps. I find them
Yeah.
nerve-wracking, and you usually requires timing and stealth, and there's always risk of you blowing yourself up or hitting the wrong target. I don't feel in control, and so that adds anxiety to in a gameplay space. Like, I'm not sitting there anxious like over it. Like in my game, in that moment, I would rather just have the thing I have more control over, which is the thing in my hand, the gun, right? So I would prefer a rocket launcher over a planted bomb, because to me, a rocket launcher is the gun. I can control it. I can point and shoot, or I can lock onto something and hit it. Whereas the bombs, maybe it's even like grenades that you have to like hold the fuse and time it correctly, and like the enemy just run away and then it blows up and you're like, oh, well, that didn't do anything. Like, yeah. So yeah, I like guns. Guns over bombs.
Guns over bombs.
Yep.
I like both, quite frankly, and they both have different like places in my heart. But like, I mean, I love a good. I don't love grenades as much, but I do love like a good. One of my single favorite video game like weapon things was the remote mines in Perfect Dark, because you could just set up like death hallways with those things, and like you'd like set it up ahead of time, then you'd like take your pistol out and you'd like lure the enemies. They all come after you, and then like walk in and you go, boop, and it's one of my like single favorite like gameplay. Video game.
Yeah, the proximity mines were pretty satisfying too.
Yeah,
throw down a proximity mine and then they just get close and
right. Yeah, I do. I enjoy. I didn't used to always enjoy that gameplay, but I really enjoy that gameplay these days of being able to just like no, for my turn, so to speak, I'm laying a trap because I know how enemies are going to behave more or less, and so being able to just like use their own movement programming abilities against them always is really satisfying to me, because oftentimes it can be more effective than, and again, it's not always explosions. It could be like a bear trap locking them in place, but it's always more fun when it's an explosion. So
always. Yep.
Yeah. Cool. All right, do you like explosions that are caused by magic, or do you like explosions that are caused by technology? So we're talking here about like arcane explosion or lightning explosion or fire blast or ice barrage, right? Like the explosion, I think of like Shiva in Final Fantasy, right? Where she makes the big ice explosion, right? Or do you like, the bombs, right? The technology, or like the Iron Man, right? I think of like the Jericho missiles that he fires out, where it's like right, like, so like technology explosions versus magic.
What would you consider the ancient arrows in Breath of the Wild?
Oh, those are magic. Yeah,
those are magic. All right, sweet.
Versus like the fire arrow against like a bomb, right? When you or like when you drop the bombs on, like those are also really satisfying explosions when you do those. But yeah, I think those ain't. Yeah, no, that's magic for sure.
Good. Then
it's
I like
more
magic
of an
explosions.
Cool.
Yes.
Yeah,
magic.
I'm with you there. Like whenever a magical explosion is done well, it's almost always like really, because you can do more with magic. Imagination wise, you can always do more with magic.
Yep. Hopefully, Avowed will, coming out from Obsidian, Avowed will meet us where we want magic explosions. Go ahead.
Do you like the debris flying everywhere when you explode an object, or do you like the viscera and gore that happens when you explode a creature?
I like the environment and debris and particle effects. I think it's awesome. I hope video games can master the idea of the totally interactable environment. Like Red Faction on PS2 was that mining game on Mars where you could like actually shoot rockets into the Earth or into Mars and like mine your way through things. I think that's fascinating. And then I go back to Battlefield Bad Company 2, where you could shoot buildings down with missiles and explosions, and like it affected everyone's game. I love that stuff. And so I think it'd be a super fun, different ways to progress through levels. If you could, like Breath of the Wild style, you can collapse towers of like, or the ladders, like the bokoblins that are hanging out on the top. You can just blow up the whole structure and knock them all down. And like, you can do creative things because you're interacting with the environment. And so I just love how that works. Like if an animation when an enemy is hit with an explosion is that enemy just flies somewhere and then like lays on the ground and fades away, I'm cool with that. I don't need the like the Doom Eternal like gore chunks coming out are fun. Like I get it, it's there. fun being in air quotes because it's like kind of gory, and if you really look at it, it's whoa. And then like Mortal
Yeah.
Kombat, like with the whole like fatality system, it really gets like you kind of get a little queasy feeling in your stomach when you watch this stuff. You're just like, whoa, that's a little too real. And so like that always heads that direction versus like the environment. Like, let's go, let's blow up a tree
Sure.
and knock down. Like, can you imagine like Kana, Bridge of Spirits, like all of the little tree enemies and like everybody, you just blow them all out of the sky and like collapse all the platforms and like and enemies just die. That'd be great.
Yeah, I think that, though, I normally agree when they get like really gritty with it, like try to get really gritty with it, it can be like dark and weird. But like it doesn't always have to be that way, right? Like you can find fun ways to make the enemies explode too. And sometimes those can be, again, depending on the game, right? Depending on whether it's like it's supposed to be a serious game versus a fun game. Like in the fun games, making enemies blow up, this can also be really satisfying. But no, I typically agree with you. Like objects blowing up tend to be a little more fun. And if I find an explodable object in the environment, I'm usually more excited than like, oh, okay, I can blow up the enemy. That's cool. Whatever. So cool. All right. Well, here's where I mentioned implosions. Do you like implosions or explosions more? So like but an implosion could be like a black hole effect, right? Where it's like,
yeah,
sucks them in. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But the black hole effect is actually better because it consists of the same things of an explosion, but it's done backwards. So if you create a black hole, instead of like the building being exploded, it's actually being sucked into it. So the same destruction that's happening from that building's perspective is like its walls are being pulled out instead of pushed out. It's still the same effect, but now you have this really cool implosion happening in the middle that could be awesome. And no one's really explored that in video game spaces that I can think of.
No, I think they have. They've done a lot of I think I've seen like a lot of implosion things, and usually when I see them, I'm excited. Like done well.
Yeah, you're like, ooh,
done close to well. I'm like, yeah. And that goes to show that like, as much as I am a fan of explosions as the next red-blooded American, I also like they're a dime a dozen. You get kind of desensitized after years of like 80s movies and 90s movies and 2000s movies and 2010s movies, all having just massive amounts of explosions constantly.
Yep.
And then video games all having massive amounts of explosions constantly. It's when you see something different and when you find a different way to cause mayhem and destruction. It's always
I love it. Yep.
So cool.
Implosions.
All right, and then like, which is the best point of view? So this is like a multi-answer. Like, do you prefer explosions in isometric games, third-person shooters, first-person shooters, or any other kind of game genre, platformers? Like, where are explosions like meant to be?
I'm gonna say third-person shooter or a third-person action game. Like whether it's Uncharted or if it's Gears of War, like explosions from that angle for some reason just hit different. Like the isometric thing, if you're playing like StarCraft 2 and buildings explode, you're up in the sky looking down on everything. It's fine. Like buildings explode. It's kind of nice as long as it feels right. First person shooters are close to third person, but there's just something about being able to see your character in the frame versus just the gun that did it. I think. And I'm actually like playing through a bunch of Call of Duty games lately, and I've experienced a lot of the cinematic first-person shooter explosions through it. Most recently, I finished Call of Duty Ghosts, and it's fun, it's cool, it's dramatic, it works. But for some reason, like Gears of War and Uncharted have better explosions than those do, and they're third person. That's the only thing I can think of that would be different.
Yeah, I think it's because like with a third person, all you need to do is like slightly change the angle to draw attention to it.
Yeah.
Versus like in a first person, it's very possible you'd either have to like fully whip the camera around, like force the camera around from the player.
Yep.
Or if you're pointed in the wrong direction, you might just altogether miss it. Whereas a third person game, like, and then you also get to see how your character, if they're smart, they'll like render like the character shielding themselves from the blast or whatever. And so I think I would agree with you. Isometric, you're too far away.
Yeah.
And and in other games, it's all questionable whether they belong in the first place, right? Depending on like the platformers and stuff. So cool. All right. Well then, what are some of your favorite examples of explosions in video games, and what do you love most about explosions as they are in video games? Just general kind of final question there.
I've already hinted at the Battlefield Bad Company 2 example was one of my favorite explosions, and the Uncharted 2 building collapsing scene as you're fighting and sliding down. I know like Crackdown has had some awesome sandbox explosions, and Grand Theft Auto, same deal. Just Cause, apparently, I haven't played Just Cause 4. Like you can blow up gas stations and such, and they go crazy with the explosions. And Crysis had some good ones too, but I don't know. I don't really have like a single favorite. explosion. Like the one that I've had the most fun playing with would probably be Breath of the Wild when you throw bombs and arrows and stuff.
Yeah, the dropping the bombs on the bases and just seeing it completely light up all the explosions. They did the like I said, timing, that element of rendering the timing of like, you can see your bomb hits and it explodes, and then there's that sort of like tiny little briefest like boom, right, as the like everyone goes off. Instead of just one big boom, it's like you can actually even see the individual like chain reaction of boom of all of them blowing up and still forming this big cartoony fireball. It's like, yes, that would be the only time where I regret that they didn't have like environmental like Red Faction like that base should be in splinters, right? It would have been so nice to be able to do that kind of thing. So, but I'm with you. That's really the only example I can think of. Like, I know there are several times in video games where like I cause an explosion and I'm like excited, right? Like, and it's happened so many times, but because, like I said, it's happened so many times, I can't pick out like a single individual example of a time where I'm just like, yes, that game did it right. So, yeah. Whew. All right. Well, any other thoughts? We can end a nice tight button on this one. Give everybody their 4th of July back.
I mean, there's always I feel like there's the obligatory, I'm not all about American exceptionalism. So, 4th of July, there's a lot of problems in this country. And so like a lot of people are mistreated and a lot of people are oppressed. And so like kind of a caveat sort of message about, yes, this is a discussion about explosions because traditionally in America, we blow things up, but fireworks are problematic for wildlife.
Thing, right?
It is.
Of course.
And so fireworks are problematic. There's a lot of issues with smoke and noises and how it affects the environment and the wildlife that are in it. And so like, know that, we're not condoning those things. So explode at your own conscience level. And also like America, yay, where I'm scared to death to drop my kid off at school. And
I mean,
that kind of
this
stuff
is
unresolved.
This is the most this is the most like, this is one of those things where I'm like, this is an aspect of American culture I can get behind, right? Which is like, we like to blow stuff up, right? Like
cookouts, chili dogs, beer, fireworks, when done responsibly.
There's nothing wrong with loving aspects of your country, right? There's nothing wrong with loving your country, even, and whilst it's important still, a true patriot, I think, acknowledges the problems, not just acknowledges, but works to fix them, call them out. Like, that's fine. You can do those things. There's a fallacy that like being critical of your country means that you hate it.
Right.
That's not the case at all. In fact, arguably, if you hate your country, you will do nothing. Truly, people who actually hate their country do like nothing for it, or
January 6th.
Actively bring right. They actively suppress or ignore their you don't love your country, you love your team, right? If you love your country, you will accept all, like, not accept all, but like you will at least be like treat everyone in the country and their points of view with dignity. So if you like shut yourself off to all that, then you're not a patriot and you don't love this country. You love your team, right?
Right.
And that's Democrat or Republican, right? But being critical of this country and being able to say, like, you know what, like, we've got our problems and we should fix them so that this place can be something I continue to love, right? If you punish your kids' bad behavior, you wouldn't say that you were unloving towards them, would you? No, you'd be saying you're disciplining them, right? Like, you're teaching them discipline. Parents have to do that. If your spouse and you sit down and you tell them something that like annoys you, that they do a behavior, and ask them to stop doing that, you don't hate them, you love them and are telling them lovingly that they need to correct their behavior because it's impacting your relationship, right? Like, it's the same thing. A country is just a really big relationship that you have, and so to be critical of your country is to love it. It'd be loving towards it. So
let's
in the same vein, eat the rich. Let's do it.
Yeah.
In the same way, though, like, you can also sit there and say the things that are great about this country include our exploding of things and our love of explosions, and whether it's harmful to the environment. Like, I'm not even, again, we're talking about video game explosions here. They are the version of explosions that are, I can't even say that because like the video game industry has a huge environmental impact with like you consider electricity and stuff like that, but they're a relatively conscience-free way of enjoying
blowing stuff up.
So blow stuff up in your games, blow stuff up in in your backyard. And happy 4th of July. Try to enjoy some explosions today while also being, of course, mindful as well.
Of course. Yes.
All right. Well,
that's it.
Good episode.
That was my final thought.
Nice, quick. Boom. Yeah.
Yep.
Wham, bam. Thank you, America. Happy 4th of July, everyone. We want to hear your thoughts on video game. What are your favorite video game explosions? What are your, like which are better versions, right? Magic, technology, guns, bombs, implosions, explosions. We want to hear all those thoughts. What is a genre that you're like, oh no, guys, the explosions in this genre or in this game, those are like where it's at? Or are you guys like, you are barbarians, you are the worst people in the world, how dare you glorify such violent things? That is a valid thought and a valid criticism. We would love to discuss it with you. We want to hear all those thoughts and more. Termite, where can the listeners and Pod Smashers share their thoughts if they have them?
Y'all can find us over at 80bitpodsmash.com. That's our landing website with links to all of our social media outlets, as I said earlier in the show. So go check those out, as well as our podcast platforms. I won't reiterate all of those details because you already heard it once. So 80bitpodsmash.com. Find us there. Click those links. Jump into our Discord server and have a conversation with us and enjoy some fireworks.
Enjoy them. Have a good week. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.